been very clear that they want Greenland. They believe that it's the US's. And Donald Trump sent his son, Donald Trump Jr., early on a trip to Greenland, accompanied by Charlie Kirk, who, of course, was killed last year. But they went on this trip to kind of almost put this marker in the sand. You've also had J.D. Vance's wife, the Second Lady, Usha Vance, visit Greenland. So this is a long time in the making. But of course, the events at the weekend in Venezuela means that all of a sudden people are actually taking Donald Trump a bit more literally in terms of what he's been saying and thinking, well, if you did that with Maduro in Venezuela, are you actually really, this isn't just bombast. You might really go through with it on Greenland.
Hugo Rifkind on Times Radio.
Now, every Tuesday at this time, we find out what's happening in Washington. And Katy Balls is the Washington editor of The Times. Hello, Katy.
Hello.
Good to speak to you, Katy. Obviously, we need to talk about Greenland through a Washington prism, of course. One of the president's top aides, Stephen Miller, has said that Greenland rightfully belongs to the United States and that no country can stop America from annexing the Danish territory. Here he is speaking to CNN.
The United States should have Greenland as part of the United States. There's no need to even think or talk about this in the context that you're asking of a military operation. Nobody's going to fight the United States militarily over the future of Greenland.
That's the senior White House aide, Stephen Miller there. Katy, what are we to make of this? I mean, that is he's basically saying, he's not saying we're not going to send troops. He's saying nobody's going to fight back if we do. Should we take this seriously?
In some ways, what Donald Trump and his administration are saying isn't that different than what they said 6 months ago, what they said around the time of the inauguration. They've been very clear that they want Greenland. They believe that it's the US's. And Donald Trump sent his son, Donald Trump Jr., early on a trip to Greenland, accompanied by Charlie Kirk, who, of course, was killed last year. But they went on this trip to kind of almost put this marker in the sand. You've also had J.D. Vance's wife, the Second Lady, Usha Vance, visit Greenland. So this is a long time in the making. But of course, the events at the weekend in Venezuela means that all of a sudden people are actually taking Donald Trump a bit more literally in terms of what he's been saying and thinking, well, if you did that with Maduro in Venezuela, are you actually really, this isn't just bombast. You might really go through with it on Greenland.
How's all this landing, both Greenland and Venezuela combined, landing in Washington? Is Washington feeling about as blindsided as the rest of the world is feeling?
With Donald Trump, there's always a question as to, he says things, he obviously prides himself on the art and the deal and so forth. And therefore, how much is positioning, how much will he really do? I think on Venezuela, there was increasingly a sense that there was going to be a move because there was this amping up, if you think back to the boats and the blockade and so forth. But it's still, I think, caught many by surprise, and it was a very close-knit operation. On that, you then, of course, have parts of the Make America Great Again base who really do feel very isolationist. I'm not sure Donald Trump can be described as an isolationist, at least these days. But therefore, I think there's a mix of emotions in the sense that figures in Trump world very much like going after the cartels. They also quite like, getting Maduro and all these photos of, how this military operation played out. But there are, I think, a few doubts, not too many going publicly, just about how this goes in the long term. As for Greenland, I think that is one where, when I've spoken to figures in MAGA, they're quite gleeful about the idea of taking Greenland. I don't think they see it as something that's about to become a forever war were it to happen.
What about Congress? Is Congress cross about not having been consulted or indeed informed about this beforehand?
I think there is a sense in Congress, obviously, particularly the Democrats feel, and there's obviously lots of questions about the legality of what Donald Trump has done with Venezuela. But of course, Congress did have an opportunity previously to try and force Donald Trump's hand when it came to interventions in Venezuela. And the administration managed to persuade enough Republicans to hold fire there and not bring about an act of Congress, act in the Senate and so forth to limit what Donald Trump could do. So there have been moments where I think Congress could have been more bold and Donald Trump would be able to do less. They didn't take them. So now there are definitely some figures and some lawmakers who feel as though they're not being suitably consulted. But I think generally speaking, the Republican side is at least publicly fairly behind Donald Trump. The problem when it comes to Venezuela, I think the problems come if it starts to get messy in Venezuela. And certainly that quite extraordinary press conference where he said, we're just going to run it of Venezuela, not giving a firm cutoff has raised a few eyebrows at least.
In other Washington news, the Republican Marjorie Taylor Green has stepped down as representative for Georgia's 14th Congressional District. Remind us of Green and how influential and important she is to the MAGA movement.
Well, it's a really interesting arc in a way when it comes to Marjorie Taylor Greene, because she was once seen as one of the uber Trump loyalists, and over time, and therefore was seen as very close to what MAGA thinks. And there's lots of, torchbearers when it comes to, the grassroots of that movement. But her relationship with Donald Trump clearly soured over a few different things, the Epstein files being one of them. But the relations became so hostile, the White House was not backing her, and she decided to, after the fallout, quit Congress. And now I think she is often the first voice to say MAGA doesn't like something Donald Trump has done. Of course, because of their personal relationship going sour, there's, more going on there. But I still think the fact that she's one of the few figures so far to come out and say, Venezuela, this is exactly, what MAGA voted to stop things like this, not to have governments get involved in regime change. I don't think you can completely dismiss it. I think we just got to see if more people come out going forward. And in the short term, I think, Marjorie Taylor Greene leaving, one down in Congress, we'll see what happens there. But building up, I think, a slight sense of, it does feel this year that we're potentially going to see more Republicans, speaking out or having their own opinions. Whereas I think the first year of Trump, so last year, Trump's return, it was, it was very hard to find dissenting figures at times. And I think with the midterms coming up, with some of the recent polling, it feels as though it's a little bit less rosy for Donald Trump when it comes to the party just always being behind him.
Would it be fair to assume, Katy, that the Republican pushback that Donald Trump is going to feel is going to be from a sort of more MAGA perspective rather than a less MAGA perspective?
Actually, I mean, I think the biggest problem really Donald Trump have with his party at the moment is you had the elections last year where the Democrats really won across the board in terms of the governorships, obviously the New York mayoral, and a lot that came down to cost of living. And there is a concern in the MAGA base that not enough attention is being paid to domestic issues. So Venezuela can be something that lots of MAGA get behind. That is very possible. But certainly, I think there is still a feeling that they need to spend much more time thinking about cost of living and domestic issues. And obviously, regime change in a foreign country is not quite that.
Thank you very much indeed. That is Katy Bowles, the Washington editor of The Times, speaking to us there. Thank you, Katy.